Okay, thank you. Welcome back to stage number 3, the best stage at Republica 2014. This is the stage where only the cool people come to. And the coolest speakers, of course. I'm looking forward to a talk with the title Beyond Reservations, Indigenous Media Society Within Social Networks. It's held by Caroline Running-Wolf and Michael Running-Wolf Jr. And they're based in Montana, but actually they have a bit more of a biography to tell you, and they will do it right now. Please give a warm hand for the both of them for their talk.
Well, thank you and welcome. Do you hear me? Okay. So our talk is about Beyond Reservations, Indigenous Meta Society Within Social Networks. And just go quick.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about are introductions and then discuss the Expat Indian Project, identity and diaspora, digital metaculture, and then give you an opportunity to have a Q&A at the end of all this.
So part of the introduction, we'll start with, oh, what happened now?
What'd you
Did
do?
the wrong one. I pressed the wrong one.
Don't click the button.
No clicking.
Yes.
Okay, how do I forward
Just,
then?
yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So, that's me. My maiden name is Caroline Old Coyote. I'm a member of the Crow tribe, or as we call ourselves, the Absaloke. I belong to the Whistling Water clan. My great-grandmother gave me the name Ichichiashide, which refers to my tribe's sacred yellow-blooming tobacco plant. And that wouldn't be simple enough, so my mother is German. She's actually Swabian. My father is Crow. No, this is not going to work, right? Where's the mouse? Yeah. So my father is Crow. His mother was Ho-Chunk, or maybe you know the tribe by the name Winnebago. And his father, Crow, but also a descendant of Mountain Chief, who is a famous Blackfeet chief. So, as you can see, I'm a woman of many different nations, and to live up to that, I also grew up on both sides of the Atlantic. I was born in Sacramento, California. I experienced my first winter in Billings, Montana. My mom actually stuck me in the snow so that I wouldn't run away while she was busy shoveling the yard. I went to kindergarten in Munich and elementary school in Toronto. And then my family decided to move back to Germany, so that's where I finished my high school. And then I did my bachelor's in tourism in Heilbronn. Worked for over a decade for the company, you might have heard about them, Kaufland. I worked for them as a project manager, and at one point I decided that my grandfather is getting older and maybe it would be a good idea to spend some more time than just the annual summer holiday with him and kind of reconnect with my Crow side of the family more. And that's how I ended up at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. And I'm there still, finishing my master's degree in Native American Studies, but way more important than a master's degree, that's where I met my husband.
Hello. Munanit, or Nahe Survey Munanit. It is my traditional name in Cheyenne, which means young eagle. Michael Running-Wolf is my Christian name. In the early 1900s, late 1800s, everyone was given Christian names, and Running-Wolf happens to be my Christian name. I am Northern Cheyenne, which is the morning star symbol here. My father grew up Lakota, but Running-Wolf itself is actually a Blackfeet name, and I also drink a lot of Earl Grey for my English heritage. Ooh, it works. Remote works. So I grew up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation up here, the little red dot up there in Montana. And I grew up in a small rural village amongst prairie dogs and, if you can believe it, small semi-feral Pomeranians. And this is my village right here. And I grew up in the village of my mother's home, my grandmother here, Grace Strangeow. She spoke only Cheyenne and had very scattered English. And for instance, all food was called muffin to her. So I'd be going around, she'd come up, give us a hamburger and says, hurry up and eat your muffin. And so that's how I grew up. And they have a road named after her now to her. And that's still actually standing there, surprisingly. Her original log cabin.
So, you go down. Oh. So now that you know a little bit about who we are and where we're coming from, we'd like to get to know you. And luckily the group is small, überschaubar. So I still think we won't have enough time to get to know all of you, but just kind of to get a feel for it. How many of you are from Germany? Please raise your hand. Oh, wow, that's almost everybody. So, do we have somebody from France qui est français? No. Almost.
Maybe.
Half. Sir. From Canada, wow. Who else did we miss? From Austria. Great. We missed Armenia.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, so I see we have a slightly mixed group here too. Do you know anything about Indians already? If you know something about Indians, please raise your hand.
There's going to be a test.
Okay.
You're from half French?
Oh gosh.
What do you know about Indians? What do you know about Indians?
Well, I grew up in the States, but I have a terrible American education about Native Americans, which I don't think really addresses anything specifically about genocide or other things like that. So, yeah.
So I guess if you think about Native Americans or Indians, what's, I guess, your first thought?
It's a really big question. I think it's carried off as or romanticized a ton, especially in American culture, and it's usually something made in Westerns and something that is for not really seen as much.
Okay. Who's a German? Do you remember who's a German?
Almost everybody.
Almost
you
anyone?
Can pick anybody randomly.
Any volunteers? Any victims? You want to be a victim? So what do you think about Indians?
What I knew about Indians is when I was a boy, I read a book which was called Sons of the Great Female Bear, and it tells the story of a clan which is having the trip in the field and how they live, and it was very interesting, but I don't know if it's realistic.
Who wrote that?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Okay, so the good news is most of you already knew something about Indians. And from the two that we've asked, which is of course not a representative, representative sample, at least you were aware that most of the knowledge was maybe romanticized and maybe not very current. So, yes, we are still here, we're not extinct, and something that maybe nobody knew, I want to see the people. Something that maybe none of you knew is that actually we live right here among you in Europe. That's what my master's thesis is about. It's called the Expat Indians Project, and I started out in the fall of 2012 by interviewing the finalists that were auditioning for Disneyland Paris. They were looking for new blood, new flesh, some authentic Native American actors for their show. And I interviewed some of the young guys that were just getting ready to finish high school and were very interested in maybe spending the next year or so in Paris, France. Last summer, my husband and I went to Europe and interviewed some Native Americans at a teepee village in Brulon, France. And this teepee village had their big 10-year anniversary, and as you can see, it was very funky. They even had teepees lighted up in neon colors. But it was good for us and for my project because a lot of Native Americans living in Europe were at that teepee village at the time of this big 10-year anniversary. So we could do a lot of interviews.
And if you don't know, Brulon is outside Le Mans, where they have the F1 or A1.
F1, 24-hour.
Something, I don't know. They don't do that in America. It's a big 24-hour race, and it's outside, about like 20 minutes outside of Le Mans on the autoroute. And it's kind of weird. You have, if you were able to see through this teepee lodge, you'd see this relatively picturesque French countryside village. And right in the middle of it, to the side of it, to the south of it, is this funky, crazy, neon-lit teepee village.
After that, we went to Paris, or actually to the Buffalo Bill Wild West show, and met up with the actors or performers there, talked to them, interviewed them. And a little bit later, we continued on to Recogne in Belgium, where the bison farm, or La Ferme des Bisons, has a big annual meeting with mainly hobbyists, but also, as you can see down here, some Indians who decided that they would try and sell little gravel rocks for $500. It's a great deal. You should try this. It's a sacred rock.
And that's Earl Grey, for the record.
So you might be wondering, who are those people that we were interviewing? Where are they from? What's their background? We have Aaron Buffalo. He's Northern Cree, and on this picture here, you can see him. That's in Calgary while he's auditioning. He got the job. We met him again in Paris, and he had just come to Paris like 4 months before we were there, and he was just barely over what he thinks might be the longest jet lag in history. It took him 3 months. 3 months to get past his jet lag.
We interviewed several different types of subjects. Aaron here was type 1, is that he just arrived in Europe. He didn't speak French. He insisted on eating only McDonald's because it's the closest thing to American food in France.
He actually complained that McDonald's in France is healthier than in the United States. It's even there you get healthy food, was his big complaint.
And another type we also interviewed are Native Americans who've been here a while. Ed Bryant here, for instance, has been here for 17 years, and he's from British Columbia, Canada, in Tsimshian.
So what Ed Bryant does, not only has he been here for a while, he also speaks some of the local languages, Right now, he lives in Austria, and he works as a performer. He also teaches his traditional wood carving, his art, to Europeans in some workshops. And at the same time, he is also very interested in revitalizing some lost knowledge in his home village. So, for example, he told us that he found somebody in Europe who knows the Tsimshian way of building bow and arrow. And the Tsimshians themselves have lost this knowledge, and so he is bringing that knowledge back from Europe.
And along the lines of repatriation, we also talked with Olinado, who's an Aztec from Mexico, and he's there specifically to recover Montezuma's crown. He originally came years ago on the centennial of Columbus Day to try to get Montezuma's crown back from Austria. But if you know Austrians, they weren't so happy about that, or so easily persuaded by a good smile.
And then, of course, there's my cousins, Kevin Dust and Kendall Old Elk, both Crow, also have lived in Europe for more than a decade. Kevin came in his 30s and started working for the Buffalo Bill Show as an authentic Native American secondary role. That's the official title. And in the meantime, he is Chief Sitting Bull.
So he started out as a warrior and worked his way up through the corporate ladder to chief.
And Kendall, the one on the right, he came to Spain and had been working in a theme park in Spain. And that's where he met his wife and has a beautiful daughter, 10 years old. Okay. So this is his daughter, Jasmine. And she's 10 years old. She was born in Spain. She visited Crow Country once, if I remember correctly. But her father is doing a great job. He's teaching her the language and the culture and the songs and the dances. And so she speaks at her young age. She speaks English. She speaks Abzaloque. She also speaks Spanish, her mother tongue. And now, last March, not this March, but last March, they moved to France, to Brulon. So now she's going to school in France, and she speaks French as well.
And she represents a third type. So we have the newly arrived colonists, and you have the established 20-plus year colonists, I guess, Native Americans. And you have another third type that we encountered was Native Americans who grew up in Europe apart from their homelands, but still have a strong connection to their culture and heritage. For instance, here we have Blue Cloud. She's an orphan. She's about 80 years old. And just before World War II, she was abandoned in Belgium and never saw any of her family up until the late 1990s, where she reconnected. And the only thing she knew about her heritage was that she was Northern Cheyenne, one of my tribe members, and made her way in the 1990s after selling her house, and it's worthy of a book, actually, her ordeal, ended up reconnecting with her Northern Cheyenne family, and I was inspired by her.
Yeah, I keep telling Michael, the movie is not going to be only about Blue Cloud.
It's a Cheyenne.
No, but she is wonderful. And we did prepare a short trailer for you, so... oh yeah, wait.
Don't click that.
Don't click that. Click here. So currently I'm in post-production with the movie. And this trailer is just to give you a short impression of what it's about. So I hope you enjoy. Jedes Schulkind weiß, dass die Indianer beim Ende des 19. Jahrhunderts von den Amerikanern ausgerottet wurden. Dans l'hypothèse improbable où les Amérindiens n'ont pas disparu, ils habitent dans un tipi sur une réserve sans aucun espoir et sans avenir.
They think Native American Indians are extinct. I've heard that from more than like 10 people at a time. And they think we're extinct, I guess. I'm like, okay, that's cool. You ever watch the show? And they'd be like, oh yeah, they got Native Americans on there. I'm like, yeah, we're not.
Welcome to Buffalo Bill Wild West Show with Mickey and friends, Buffalo Bill, Sitting Bull, and the Rough Riders.
¿Y si los indios salieron de las reservas desoladas? ¿Qué pasaría si viven en Europa? What is a real Indian? What is the future of Indian identity?
Week-end à Brulon pour plonger dans la culture des Crows. Plus de renseignements sur www.
For me, globalization would be just how small the world is becoming now. You have me, a Crow, sitting in a teepee camp in France, maybe having Spanish food. It's just all these different things coming together, not just through internet, but just the way the things in the modern world are moving so fast. It's very unusual that a Crow would be teaching somebody from Andalusia to speak Catalan.
And it's obvious that today our land has been taken and reduced down to little reservations. And sure, that's our very old way, but we must adapt to the new way. And why do you think we're here in Europe anyways? I believe that we're the first wave of an invasion happening now in Europe by Native Americans.
And he opens my wings to fly wherever I want to go. That's a good thing. I'm free.
So what I forgot to do, I wanted to add a link to my webpage and the Indiegogo site, but actually we didn't get the Indiegogo site set up yet because the plan is to finish this film, and unfortunately I'm a Native American Studies master's degree and not a film master's degree, so I really need somebody who knows what they're doing to finish this film in a good way.
So what you're seeing is a really rough draft of the trailer. It's what we intend to do is get the trailer up and running, and then start. We have a website. We'll have a link at the end of the page, the presentation here. But some of the questions we asked
were just general questions about identity. So we asked them, what constitutes your cultural identity? How do you connect with your home community? How do you stay in touch? And how do you a lot of our traditions have to do with groups of people, families, clans, the whole tribe. So if you're just single little Indians, one little, two little, three little Indians living in Europe, how do you still keep your traditions alive overseas, away from home? And all of these questions basically had to do with identity. So you might ask yourself, what's the big deal? Why? Why did I ask them all these questions? Well, the main question behind all of this was, what is a real Indian? We had the information from books. A lot of you being Germans, I bet you heard of Karl May before. We have the information from Western movies, also not the best source. We have some information that we might have learned in school. Most of the time, also not exactly great infos. So what is a real Indian? What makes a real Indian? And the point was that many years ago, my dad and me, we were at some powwow on my tribe's reservation, on the Crow reservation, and he met this old friend of his. And first, the typical, "Hey, great seeing you. How have you been? What have you been doing?" Blah, blah, blah. And then, all at once, this childhood friend looks at my dad and says, "You're not a real Crow anymore." My dad almost, fainted. He was shocked. I kind of thought it was amusing because I get that all the time. Not even with the anymore. It's just, you're not a real Crow, period. So I thought, this is going to be interesting. I want to see what my dad answers because my dad definitely is a real Crow. So how is this going to go down? So the childhood friend was saying, my dad was, "What do you mean I'm not a real Crow anymore?" So the childhood friend was like, "Yeah, well, you weren't born on the reservation. And you didn't grow up on the reservation." Well, my dad was born in the same hospital that his childhood friend was born at. And of course, they were childhood friends after all. They grew up together in the same area. And yeah, you don't speak the language. Well, actually, my dad speaks the language better than he does. So that didn't count. So then his childhood friend kind of stuttered a bit and looked, and then he said, "But you've been away too long. And that's why," he triumphantly added, "and that's why you're not a real Crow anymore." Now, what do you say to that?
So to counteract that discussion, that whether or not you're a real Crow or not,
My husband has a problem with the question of a real Crow or not. It's a real Indian, okay? It doesn't matter if Crow or Northern Cheyenne.
you're better off not being Crow, quite frankly. But it does raise some interesting and important points. Basically, the tribe, the reservation, is considered the home of all the Native Americans. It's the home, it's where the wellspring, where the waters come from, that all Indians, the Indianness of all Indians is on the reservation. It's sort of like basically pork-fed pork comes from the reservations in terms of Indians. But there's a problem with that. And so we're going to do kind of a little exercise here. So I'm going to get everyone to stand up. Up, up. Come on. It's now. And then if you could raise your right hand. And then with the other hand, touch your nose. Okay, good job. That has nothing to do with this. So imagine that all of you represent the whole of all Native Americans in the world. And there's probably, I don't know, maybe
21.
21 of you guys. Okay. So if we can so imagine you're all Native Americans. So there's a question. How many of you guys live on the reservation?
So, what do you think? Just a wild guess.
3, 5.
You're doing percent or just from the 21 here now?
So like if there was 90%, you'd have, 9 out of 10 people living on the reservation. Or, so.
I'm doing percent. 3%.
No, and then I would do 10%.
Live on the reservation?
Any other guesses?
Anyone got higher guesses? This time you can raise your hand. That guy looked at me. Get him.
Which one?
Maybe 90%?
No idea.
I would have guessed 1 to 2%, but as another person has said that, I guess now 33%.
Which is actually very, very good. If we can keep 7 of you, actually these people over here, everyone else can sit down to stand. About a third of all Native Americans still live on the reservation. And if you guys were basically 2/3 of us don't live on the reservation. 2/3 of us, according to Caroline's dad's friend, named Stupid, by the way. I don't know if you mentioned that.
I didn't.
That was a punchline.
I'm not good at jokes, I'm sorry. But his name really is Stupid, or nickname. So, thank you. You can sit down now, but it was just to visualize that actually only a third live on the reservation. And for these statistics, by the way, any border town still counts as on the reservation. So it's actually on or near the reservation. And Michael and me, already living in Bozeman, we're too far away from the reservation. We're off the reservation. And of course, Kendall and Kevin and Ed and all of the people I just introduced to you, they live way off the reservation. And like I said, one of the questions was, how do you stay in touch? How do you stay in touch with your home community? And all of the answers were Facebook, Skype, internet. But the first answer was always Facebook. And the way I always say it is, Facebook is Indian country today. Because on Facebook, we can stay updated on family issues. We can also stay updated on tribal events, community gatherings, whatever we need. It's all on Facebook. And for example, the Crow tribe has its own Facebook page where they have public relations messages and meeting invites and whatever.
So tell me about who's on the... I've never seen the Crow Facebook page because I have better things to do. Maybe they haven't been there. So who are these? Who am I looking at? Who are these faces here?
Oh, gosh. Okay, so this is the tribal chairman, and this is the tribal vice chairman, and this is some white guy, I don't know.
It's used to be the most powerful American senator, Max Baucus. He was the head of the Appropriations Committee.
I think my husband was setting me up.
Well, you're forgetting to mention that these are all old coyotes. This is the executive branch of the Crow tribe.
Okay, right now my family is in charge. He is setting me up. But Facebook is not only to stay in touch with your family. It's not only to know when is the open house or the feed or whatever else going on, the hand games. On Facebook, there's also sharing of history, family history, tribal history. In this case, this is later on in that post, there's little explanations to these different World War I soldiers that were a big part of the Crow tribal history, actually also the Northern Cheyenne tribal history, and also U.S. history in World War I. There's also patterns for how to make a lance case or beadwork for sale.
For those who don't know, Timothy McCleary here, the one making this post, is the tribal anthropologist. So they use Facebook for pretty much everything, and that's pretty common in Indian country because we don't have the technical capacity to have websites and webmasters and everything that the Western world takes for granted.
And no cell phone. I mean, yes, cell phone, but no cell phone service on the reservation. So, something else that gets covered by Facebook is culture revitalization and language revitalization. So, this post here is about, I'm sorry it's Crow heavy because of course I'm connected with the Crow tribe. But this is about hand games being used as a teaching tool. And there is also a Facebook page, the Absaloke Word of the Day, that has songs, words, phrases, sometimes just old photos, I guess. So it's very much the way, it's the virtual reality of Indian life today is on Facebook. But of course, that's not sufficient for all our needs.
So to me, it raises why I'm interested in this topic is like the activity demonstrated. Increasingly, Native Americans are becoming disconnected with our theoretical homelands, even though we weren't put there of our own free will. At least the Cheyenne were. The Crows, they got their own land because they got along with Custer, by the way, if you want. And we're starting to have these hybrid societies where you're part Native American and part non-Native American. You know, this includes Asian, black, white, and so forth. And it also raises interesting concepts of cultural sovereignty. What do you do if your culture needs to reach beyond the borders and is reaching beyond the borders but without our control? And how do we maintain our culture in a society that's global? Like we showed the map earlier, we have connections in Germany, Austria, France, Spain, England, and they're all connecting to each other through Facebook. And it's not exactly a cultural repository, unless, of course, you're into, I don't know, kitty cat pictures and all that good stuff. And So let's start with the sovereignty of our own identity. For instance, here, this man's a German man, and you can see his nice pasty flank here. And you have Belgians and Frenchmen, and this was in Raconia. And this picture always gets me amused because here you have a caricature of Native Americans as defined by authors. So we have cultural appropriation going on here. You have, for the Northern Cheyenne, it's George Grinnell. And if you read anything about the Northern Cheyenne or the Cheyenne, you're always going to read George Grinnell's books here, for instance, The Fight in Cheyenne, and whatever he says. And also, if you don't recognize him, this is Carl May over here, and Winnetou. And these are you'll notice that the perceptions of Native Americans are being made by people of no color, pigment deprived.
Bleichgesichter.
And so how do we deal with that? How do we stop the appropriation and then begin implementing the sovereignty of our own identity? And one concept is the sacred knowledge. Much like there's this Bernie Springs outside of my village where I grew up, and it's sacred, and the place is sacred, considered sacred, and the water is considered healing, and you see all these prayer flags here, and these prayer flags predate even my grandparents, and knowledge can be sacred. The Lakota say, which my father's side say, that simply breathing is sacred, and whatever you give word to, voice to, has power. But there's a problem, though. We're starting to lose our culture. Among the Northern Cheyenne, we number about 10,000 people, and only 5 can read and write the official language, the official Northern Cheyenne language. And technically, that's 0% of us speak our own language, and decreasing. The average age of the Northern Cheyenne speaker is over 40 years old. We're approaching a period in time in which the living link between us and our language and culture is about to break. And we need help. And there are efforts. In the Montana, there's been a grant called the Montana Indian Language Preservation Pilot Program, which I've been a part of. And this is my mother here recording some audio. And this is some of the software we're building, a screenshot. And what am I missing here? Irving. Come on.
Well, what are you doing for that?
Oh, I'm here right now. Go. Irving.
Irving.
Yeah.
Okay. So, when we were recording that, this was actually a project that was not part of the MILP, as we call it, the MILP 3 grant. It was part of a local elementary school in Bozeman that had a so-called World Language Brain Gym project. And what they did was they said, we want to have some kind of Native American language represented in our so-called brain gym, because why are we teaching our kids some language that maybe there's hardly any representatives, but we are on Native American land and we are here, so let's teach them one of the local languages of the Native Americans from this area. And that's how I and my mother-in-law got involved with that, and we were recording some language snippets and some songs and some games, so that the kids in their break, they could learn a little bit of Cheyenne. Just the simple stuff, you know, counting 1 to 5, body parts, things like that.
So beyond preservation and trying to get beyond the Facebook paradigm, what we really need is a digital knowledge keeper. It's something internet accessible, something that is easy to access, and something that connects us in a truly holistic way between our own language and culture. For instance, Northern Cheyenne has been revitalized, if you can say that, for about 40 years now, but we're still facing a decline in population of Cheyenne speakers, and we virtually do not increase the amount of people who actually learn how to write. And it's because, I think, we're teaching Cheyenne within a cultural vacuum. We're using the Bible to teach Cheyenne right now, when we actually have a very large and rich, deep oral literature and oral heritage and oral history. And I think we can amplify the efforts of language revitalization by providing context, cultural context to the language preservation efforts. For instance, and so what does this look like? What we really need is a way to connect the people who are living in Europe and America and outside of the reservations who don't have access to a Cheyenne speaking only grandmother. And what is that exactly? Software. What I'm interested in is providing open source software that holistically connects and unites language preservation, language learning apps, software that is aimed at 5 to 10-year-old children, who teaches them their culture, teaches the stories. Like, for instance, we have a rabbit song. Why can't we teach them the word wuku, which is rabbit, and teach them also the rabbit song? But we're not doing this, and because it's difficult. Like I mentioned before, we don't have webmasters, we don't have software developers, but what we do have is a cultural heritage and a desire to. We have money. We have the Montana Indian Language Preservation Pilot Program, so mouthful, to do something. But I think the missing gap is software, the knowledge. And what we need is a digital knowledge keeper, a system in which to spread the knowledge and share the knowledge. And is it a dream? Actually, no. I am part of, I'm the executive director of Buffalo Tongue Inc., whose goal, with the support of volunteers and donations, is to create open source software to teach children and to create digital repositories that put the power of the culture within the individual tribes' hands in each reservation, and so they can jump in here. She's skipping her cues. Again, really likes that buffalo picture. So yeah.
We've done a lot of talking. And I really like that we're a small group, so I'm hoping you have some questions, because I personally would really prefer to be in a dialogue here. So, any questions, raise your hand and Michael will bring the microphone.
Now, Facebook is not that old. You said it's the main tool for you to stay in contact and to vitalize your culture. I wonder, what did you do before? Or is it something which led to a new phase of revitalization?
There was, what was that called before Facebook?
High Five, MySpace. There's this array of social networks that I think Facebook is the first one we've actually used, though. I mean, we existed on MySpace, but we just didn't have the technical capacity. Like, literally, on my little village, we didn't have telephones until the late 90s, much less the internet. We didn't probably get the internet until mid-2000s.
And they still don't have the cell phone. So yes, to your question, before Facebook, there wasn't that much. It was maybe emails or telephone, the regular landline telephone. But now, thanks to Facebook, really there's a really large community on Facebook, a large Indian community. And it's wonderful, because when I was still living here in Germany, thanks to Facebook, I was able to see pictures and hear songs and know who got a baby and watch the latest powwow news flash, and it's great.
I have two questions which follow up, I think, the first question. One is, I know from Latin America and indigenous people in Latin America that one very successful way to connect distributed diasporic cultures, and especially the kind of predated cultures or extinct cultures almost, that they were very successful in using video and radio projects. And I mean, Facebook is easy access, so it obviously has advantages nowadays, but the two advantages of those projects were that they were including events, so living culture in a way, also the moving image, but also building their own infrastructures and protocols, so it was kind of an empowerment too. So this is the first thing I wonder about, whether you experienced that. And the second one...
Wait.
Okay.
It'll be easier that way. So I can talk for my tribe again, the Crow tribe. There's been efforts for a radio station, a Crow radio station, for quite a while. And it's actually a nonprofit that is continuously plugging forward, trying to get this radio station out there and getting it to work. But I guess part of the difficulty that they're facing is the geographic situation. So the reservation has mountains. We're in Montana. It has mountains. And I guess some of those mountains seem to be a challenge for the radio waves. And that's one of the things that I know. I know from other tribes, for example, every time when I drive through South Dakota, I love listening to the local Native American radio station there. And it's great because you have the connecting of families and communities, you have the updates on some events, you have the traditional music, the modern music of that tribe. I can't see. So, yes, radio stations, TV.
Yeah, there's other various media operations out there. You got a second question? The other tribes do that. Lakota is pretty aggressive about that. They even translated Bernstein Bears, which is a popular children's cartoon in America, to Lakota and transmitted on PBS. Yeah.
The second one is maybe an idea or just an association I got from your description of the need to collect this kind of core knowledge and identity and the difficulties. And I was wondering about wiki technology, like Wikipedia, because what you described is kind of an expert approach to collect language samples and this. And I know that it's just very helpful for disparate cultures to have these easy access collection bins where culture can be recollected by everyone just having easy access.
Actually, I'm glad you asked that. If you can't tell, we weren't actually anticipating more than a 30-minute presentation, so I had to hack my stuff on at the last minute. But you're right, actually. Right now, we are in the paradigm of Facebook, but there has been quite a bit of money and effort being expended to create these expert systems where you have a top-down system that and then kind of imposing the culture, but you don't hear about it, you don't know about it, and largely it hasn't really worked. What I want to do with my software project is to actually create a system for the people, the children specifically, to add stuff to the cultural repository and actually be able to create your own family individualized repository. For instance, Northern Cheyenne has two major dialects, Sisistas and Sutai. We only document one of those languages, but it's practically another language on the reservation. But we only have the acceptable language, the official accepted Cheyenne language, and we're cutting off about half the Cheyenne speakers. And there goes kind of your problem of revitalization. So the bottom-up approach would be to use like databases like Mongoose, or use databases that kind of like automatically connect to each other and auto-update, and put them on cell phones. It's simple as, I mean, like, we don't have cell phones yet, but it's coming. And have the children go out and say, how do you say uskis? Like, for instance, Weasel is different between the two dialects. And so why don't we give this power to the children and let them have their own? And that if they really wanted to have the software and create their own website, their own cultural repository.
I have a very similar question according to Wikipedia, because I don't know if you already use Wikipedia and if you really know that there are Wikipedia language versions of some Indian languages. I don't know exactly which ones, but I know that the Cree language and Inuktitut, it's not your country, but I don't know if Cherokee Wikipedia exists, and you can not only write articles in Wikipedia in your language, but you can also have the spoken Wikipedia, so you can record audio files and contribute them to Wikipedia, and they will be saved there, hopefully for very long, and I think they will be saved in a better place than in Facebook.
Yeah,
and it's
no,
better to access.
I agree, but there is one problem with that, though, is that we do have our indigenous access models. For instance, some stories you can't tell unless there's snow on the ground, but other stories it's okay, like historical stories. A story that we went over there and killed some crow because they were in the way. Those kind of stories are open, like stories we're willing to brag about. But there's also sacred stories, stories that you're not allowed to talk about outside of certain spiritual contexts. And though the Wikipedia is great at preservation, is also great at exploitation. It kind of puts this information out there that we don't necessarily want to share. And it brings up another topic, is that it needs to be highly individualized because every tribe is different. Every tribe has different access systems, like children, female children. Like the problem with Jasmine is that they need to go home because she's becoming a teenager girl, but her dad doesn't know the stuff, or actually doesn't have the right to tell her certain things about being an adolescent girl. And so she needs to go back to a Crow elder on the reservation, and so forth. Next question.
Yeah, like, do you guys mind sharing the first lines of the rabbit song? You mentioned the rabbit song. How does it go?
It goes wuku wuku, dotsa ne. Something about hopping, and then someone steps on it. I forgot that word.
Okay,
I'm a bad Cheyenne.
No, that's all right. Thank you.
Actually, we have that around that. We have 5 minutes.
It's actually a really mean song, and I wonder why they let their kids sing that to fall asleep. It's very surprising.
It sounded pretty mean.
Somebody steps on the rabbit and it's squished, and Any?
Yeah, I wanted to ask what other social medias or any other services you use online, because somebody already mentioned an radio station, and the first thing I thought about was, of course, online broadcast radio, because if Facebook isn't a problem, then online radio can't be a problem. So what other kinds of media do you use?
These are all good things, but the main problem is access. A lot of these radio stations, you need internet access, and we just don't really have that on the reservation.
So we have internet access, but it's almost as bad as in some parts of Germany, where you really have to look, and it's really slow. And it's okay, you know, if you just want to post a quick picture. But if you want to listen to something for a longer period of time, then you really need a better access to the internet, broadband access or whatever.
I'll do that. So we have one quick question.
I've more a comment than a quick question, because in Germany we also have a minority who's also afraid of losing the culture, the Sorbs. I don't count the Danish, because they have their own home country, and they had the problem that there are not enough children to teach the language, and maybe they also need to go on Facebook and this stuff. Don't know if they do this. Does anybody know?
Okay, so hopefully most of you went to the Mad Men, or the Ask, what was it, Yes Men talk on Tuesday, and we thought we'd show you an actual round dance song.
What about the two of you? You're the only one still sitting. Come on. So this is a real round dance, not the wannabe dance that the Yes Men did. And maybe you noticed that they're singing in 3 different languages.
this.